Well, thank you very much. Thank you for such a kind introduction. I thought I'd put up our little title slide there, and there's a mixed reality unit in play with one of my students in our one of our spaces here at Bond University. And it is a very exciting time, obviously, to be in the area of mixed reality and being able to really look at the foundation of how this is going to potentially change the landscape of how we interact with our students and also how our students learn. So it is very exciting. So what I thought we would do today as part of our presentation was give a little bit of our own experience of how we've explored and integrated mixed reality into our own classrooms, and also how we've assisted others across various different industries in applying mixed reality into their own endeavours, whether it's from an industry perspective or whether it's from a higher education perspective. So that was about the only picture I had of Michael and I at the time. Which
yeah, right. Just in front of the Apple logo. That was just
So we went down to Apple earlier this year for a bit of a play on some of their things. But we've actually known each other for about 20 years. So we were both PhD students together at Griffith University, and we sort of went out to separate institutions, but still keep our collaborative research agenda together. So it's quite exciting that even after 20 years, we can actually stand to be both in the same room as each other, but also go and see various things. So I thought we would anchor this in a real discussion about why we need to start thinking about different methods, different TEL-enabled approaches to exploring our students and learners and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of talk about jobs, about graduate attributes, about how we can connect our learners into work. And I think that a lot of people are grappling with this, and there's a lot of thoughts and processes about it. But I always sort of like to really point out that even though they talk about all of these different work skills and all of these different methods, nothing really changes. The still core tenets of learning are there. It's not like technology has totally changed everything and that we have to think about things in totally different ways. We still have our core skills that we want our learners to be able to appreciate, learn, and also experience. And it doesn't really matter what technology we throw at them, those skills are still important. Things like communication, active listening, critical thinking, problem solving. And what we tend to see happen is that a lot of people think to themselves, well, how do I throw a piece of technology at them to try to maybe look at engagement? Maybe it's engagement that is the thing that is a bit of a struggle. And I guess what we wanted to try to do with a lot of our work was, rather than leading with the technology first, which unfortunately is often what ends up happening, which is that the people above or even yourselves get a little bit excited perhaps by something shiny and new, and you think this will make a great engaging activity for my students, or perhaps it will enable me to have a scholarship piece at a conference or journal publication, without really exploring the method of why I've integrated that piece of technology into the classroom. But what we can see as part of the Future Job Report is that technical skill and actually being able to work with technology is one of the key tenets of learners themselves. We can see, if we look at the latest Gartner Emerging Tech Hype Cycle, this was released, I think, about 7 days ago or so, that augmented reality and mixed reality are still on the list, which is good to see, but it's not really changed. And I think we've got to be mindful whenever we look at any of these cycles, is that they come and they sit there for a while, but from what I've seen in regards to augmented and mixed reality, it's stayed about that 5 to 10 year mark for about 5 to 10 years. It's not really changing. And I think that's some of the things that we want to sort of talk about during this sort of hour period is, why do we think that's the case? And why is it not moving along this cycle as much as what we would have all hoped it to do so? The latest Horizon report, which was released a couple of weeks ago, also highlights mixed reality in the 4 to 5 year bracket. But what's interesting is if we go back in time to last year's, the years before, that it still was in the 4 to 5 year adoption bracket, just like in the hype cycle. And so we need to be very mindful when we place our focus on something like the Horizon report or the hype cycles, in that it's not necessarily going to give us the coalface approach, our approach as educators in the classroom, that this indeed will be the case, that this is a little bit of navel gazing, and through research as well. But we do need to be very mindful about trying to sort of say it will be in this time frame. Now, we all know that mixed reality is a hot topic, and we can see it from these various reports. We can see it with the likes of Apple looking at integrating into the augmented reality ecosystem, and they have with their latest software, but they're also looking at it from their latest hardware. We can see various groups like Microsoft and Google, etc., also moving into this landscape rapidly. So there's a lot of technology players and industry players moving in. We see the navel gazing and the reports exploring the idea of mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, the umbrella term of XR or extended reality coming out now. And so there's a lot of push around it, and I think that we're starting to reach a point where maybe it's going to happen. So let's have a bit of a look at what is all of this stuff about. So we've mentioned the term mixed reality a couple of times here, but what is it? And I think that's an interesting question, because what I've noticed in the literature, and I'm sure you have as well, is that people oftentimes interchangeably use these terms, where you'll see mixed reality, extended reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, and oftentimes they're using them perhaps in the incorrect way or the incorrect terminology. What we sort of look at in terms of this is that extended reality is a bit of the umbrella. So imagine it's a big circle around this slide here. That's essentially what extended reality would be. We've got the physical reality itself on the left-hand side of this diagram. Then we've got a virtual environment or a fully immersive virtual space on the extreme right-hand side. Mixed reality kind of encompasses everything else. It sits across the whole spectrum, from a tiny bit of virtual in the physical to a full-scale virtual experience like something like the Matrix would be, if you could imagine something like that. So Milgram, back in 1994, he, I guess, proposed this idea of a continuum, the virtuality continuum, which really looks at this spectrum of real to virtual. And mixed reality sort of encompasses that bit in the middle, the bit that doesn't just clearly define one or the other. And that's the bit that we play in, and that's the bit that we really want to concentrate on today. It's different to augmented reality in the sense that it's a continuum of all of these things combined. It combines various activities, which is funny when you look at the fact that AR encompasses part of the mixed reality continuum, but yet they're classified as separate technologies in the hype cycle and various things like that, which is why it's confusing for a lot of people to conceptualize and think about. So how does it relate to teaching and learning? So I've been playing with mixed reality for approximately 5 to 6 years now. I started in about 2012 was when I sort of started to dabble in the idea of mixed reality. It didn't really sort of eventuate until around about 2014, which is when I started to put out some of my publications. But essentially, what did I see? Just like most people, I thought to myself, you know, I wanted to engage my students. So that was where I wanted to start from. So I did the usual thing, which was let's get some shiny toys and see how the students engage in the classroom. Now, a lot of that ended up in failure, and most people never talk about their failures, but there were some great failures, including you know, my teacher evaluations going from, you know, 4.5 out of 5 to about 3 out of 5, and having major dips because I tried to flip the classroom and just use the technology and not consider the scaffolding and support around how to use these things, simply just use it because it was fun for me. Not so much fun for the students who had no idea what they were really doing with it, that they could engage with it slightly, but all of the support structures behind the scenes there, including all of the learning design and everything else, just wasn't written to support that particular piece of technology. It was a matter of put the tech in as opposed to the pedagogy first. And so that was my own my own learning experience, and I'm sure many of you have had exactly the same, and hopefully that series like this can really take those that perhaps haven't had those experiences and really think about not having those experiences. So anyway, look, I integrated into all my classes. So I run 4 courses at Bond University, predominantly in undergraduate studies. And those courses are courses that hybrid IT and visual arts. So essentially it's a hybrid IT visual arts degree, but I have students from law, health, business, communications, across the whole spectrum of learners in my classroom. So I cannot just say that my students are atypical IT engineering or atypical visual arts and design. They're a hybrid of all of those various different areas. And so it makes it very interesting when you're trying to adopt these types of new learning approaches to really think about the learner first. And that's sort of some of the learning I had to do myself. So how do I use the technology in the classroom? I use it both in lectures as well as in tutorials. It should be noted that my classes are small. We are a small institution and we are face-to-face. So I'm not looking at this from my own classrooms from an online distance education perspective. However, I do collaborate with Michael, who will talk next, that really does focus on distance and how we can adopt mixed reality in a distance education perspective, which we have done. So we sort of cross both. We cross the face-to-face small classroom, tutorial and intimate lecture, so up to sort of 40 students in a lecture, and tutorials tend to be around about 15 students, to distance education where we've got hundreds of people participating in these activities. So we cross the board. So the lab itself sort of grew out of my classroom in 2013, and now it's multiple collaborators and multiple projects with several $100,000 in grant funding and this type of thing. What do? We really focus on a research-led teaching approach. Everything we do is integrated in with research. We really try to embed it in with design-based research methodology, mixed methods research, and we also really explore the integration of all of these innovations under a scholarship of learning and teaching method to essentially publish all of this work. Why? Because we're both full-time teaching staff members, and we have to do research as well. So we're the typical 40-40-20 researcher, and we need to get research out the door, like most people have to think about. And so we really have this research-led approach to this, in that we need to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And hopefully everyone in the room is thinking about that as well, in that teaching and learning scholarship is a perfectly valid way of approaching these particular endeavors, and that you can have both the science and simulation behind what you're doing and artificial intelligence and all sorts of technical things, but really the outcome is about the learners and about the learning process and about how you got to that process. And so that's the most important thing. A couple of our case studies. This was working with the architects here at Bond University. The problem that they sort of had was that their undergraduate students struggle with spatial design, which is very funny when you're entering into a spatial design industry. And so from the novice first year, second year architectural students, they really do struggle with doing spatial rotation, spatial design, and translating the 2D orthographic plan drawings into 3 dimensions. Now, why do they have to do this? Because most of what they do today is CAD design. So they're using 2D plan design, but they're having to translate it into 3-dimensional CAD designs that they use either for fabrication work, or that they use for doing virtual fly-through simulations, or, and what we're using now at Bond, is that the students themselves have to produce their work in virtual and augmented reality. So we can see here in this image, this was actually a master's student presentation of their thesis, their master's thesis, where they were using a simulation of virtual and augmented reality within the physical structure of the building that they used for their particular simulation design work. And what's also fascinating is that the person who is wearing the VR headset is actually the architect who designed the building here on campus. So he was one of the industry critics inside of that design. So it was very interesting to have the original designer of the actual physical structure using a building information model, or a BIM model, of the architectural building that had been reconstructed to essentially be able to navigate and explore simulation work inside of that space. So that was quite interesting, and it was quite an interesting project for the student to engage with. We use it in health sciences. So this is an example where we were exploring anatomical structures of the heart. So in this case, the problem that they had in their classroom was access to enough anatomical structures, and also the engagement around traditional 2D structures that you can see here on the left-hand side. And so our colleague, Dr. Christian Morrow, spent some time with us, took one of our research students into his lab and really started to explore how can we reimagine anatomy and physiology classrooms to be able to explore these various structures. And so one of the examples here was the heart. They've also looked at the brain, they've looked at the back, the spine, they've looked at various structures that they've integrated into their own classroom. And what's wonderful is I don't have to sit there and create those things. They do it themselves using the process and the learning, as well as the collaborative relationship from our lab to help support that endeavour. And that's really important, is to get the actual, the teachers themselves to be able to do this, because let's face it, we can't rely on a single person to be able to do everything. So we have to create a collaborative group of individuals led through research to be able to do these endeavours. We've done it in ICT. This was an example where we looked at networking and network packet flow. Again, all of these examples are available on the website. You can download the apps for your iPhone and also for Android to have a bit of a play. It also works on tablets. And this one was a scaffolded and supported tutorial where it actually went through how to build a network, but also how to visualize packet flow. Now, it was originally produced for Central Queensland University in collaboration with Michael, and I've ended up using it in my own visual communications classroom to my web design students to explain to them how data travels around the internet and why it's important, even for a web design student, to have fundamental understanding of the internet and the web infrastructure. So what I thought I would do finally, so Michael can have a bit of a chat now that I've taken up most of the time, is that I would leave it with the paramedics application. This is probably the one that has received the most kudos, I guess, in the academy. We had a AGET article published on this last year, and it's had a lot of media and press and push across both institutions at Bond and also at Central Queensland for the innovation, but also the actual outcomes in relation to the students. Now, what I thought I would do is Michael's now going to explain how do we go about doing this particular application and how do we apply the design-based research and pedagogy before technology framework model into actually building this particular application.
You want to switch old-fashioned way? Yep, okay. you can,
so I'm now
you can answer questions. There you go. Okay, well that's good. We could play with the technology, but I figured it was easier for us to just switch seats, you know, quicker, safer. So yeah, James has told you a little bit about some of the work that we're doing with the Mixed Reality Research Lab, and hopefully, even as he's relayed those things to you, you've recognised that the pedagogy comes first. The learning comes first in every situation. So Christian Morrow, for example, his first question was, how do I get students to understand the spine or the heart or the brain? And then how can we use mixed reality to help? And the same was true for the architects, and the same was true for the computer networking study. And the same was also true for paramedics, which was actually the first study that James and I worked on together. So it's actually a few years old. But it was a really interesting case study because it gave us an opportunity to refine this model that we use. And as Lynn said, it's a design research model. We do design-based research. And the model that we use is called the Pedagogy before Technology model. And so what I'm going to do for the next couple of minutes is tell you a little bit about paramedics specifically and what we did in paramedics and how what we did in paramedics maps to that model that we've been using. And my hope, I guess, is that you'll go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think pedagogy before technology is great, and you'll use it in your own classroom, and I will gladly tell you which paper you should cite. And in fact, I think it's your pre-reading. That's the paper you should cite, the one that you got sent. So let's start with the model. So this is the model, 3 steps, not that complicated really, but starts with the pedagogy. So start by asking what the problem is that you have in your classroom. And I'm famous for saying that if you ask that question, if you say, this is the problem I have in my classroom, and the solution that you come up with is not technology based, that's entirely fine. And people go, really? You're a technologist, you're doctorates in technology. Yes, yeah, if technology doesn't work to solve your problem, then don't use technology to solve the problem. But start with the problem. And I think most teachers that you speak to, if you talk to them about their discipline, they understand what the problems are that students have in their classroom. I used to teach database, and students hated normalization. Normalization was terrible. It was one of the major things they had trouble with. And so I could, if you ask me what do students have trouble with, I could say normalization. Normalization. What can we come up with a way to solve normalization for these students? So you start with the problem, work out what the problem is. You can look at your learning outcomes. You can think about where they struggle to achieve those learning outcomes. And then think about how you can solve the problem. And here you've got to be really careful. You're not thinking about the technology. So you're just thinking about the solution to the problem. I sometimes say, if I could wave a magic wand and conjure up anything that I wanted, what would I conjure up to solve this problem? And again, it doesn't have to be technology. If wearing a clown suit works for, that's always my example, that's why James is laughing. If wearing a clown suit works for you, then do that. Right? But hopefully it's technology, because technology is making a positive difference to our world. And so hopefully you can come up with a solution You can come up with something, and then we can help you think about how the technology helps. And that's where James and I often come in. We talk to the discipline expert and we say, well, hang on, let us educate you about what mixed reality can do. Let us explain what you might use augmented reality for, or robotics for, or wearable technology for, or Internet of Things, which James's PhD student is doing some research in. And we'll tell you how that technology works, and then we can connect that back to the solution. And then, because it's design-based research, you try it and you see whether it works, and whether it doesn't work, you collect some data, and then you reflect and revise and go back and adjust your problem. Maybe you thought this was something they were having trouble with, but actually it's slightly different. And so you need to go back and you need to adjust your practice, and then you do it again. That's a design research process. James's battery is running low. Oof, he's going to see if he can plug it in. Oh, it is plugged in. That's scary. Technology, isn't it wonderful? So I'm going to give you an example now, just to sort of cement this idea of the PBT framework. I'm going to give you the example of paramedics. So James and I, let's be honest, James and I wanted to do something in mixed reality. That works, yeah. It's now plugged in. So James and I wanted to do something in mixed reality. He had worked in mixed reality. He knew that was the area he was interested in. He'd been playing with his 3D printer. He knew he wanted to do something in that area. So we did start by sort of saying, well, you know, where could we go where this is something that would probably help solve some of their problems? But we did start with the problem, and we approached the discipline academics at CQU that taught paramedics, and we said, what's your problem? And they said, our problem is that all of our students are distance students, and they don't get an opportunity to practice the skills they need as paramedics until they come to the residential school at the end of the term. And they complain all the time. And if you look on the slides, you can see some quotes from the students related directly. These are from the student evaluations, from the T-Vals, where the students are saying they wish they had more time to practice the skills. They had more opportunity to work out if they were doing it right. You can even see the last student actually says, is there some equipment or software that can at least help me go through the motions of doing the skills? And so the discipline academic, and her name is Emma Moore, she told us this was the problem. And we said to Emma, well, that's cool. That's a great problem. You know, that is a problem. How can we solve that problem? And so she said, well, I wish we could send every student a mannequin. Wouldn't it be great if we could send every single distance student one of those big plastic mannequins, the metal tools, and then they could practice for 12 weeks before they come to the res school, and that would solve their problem. So, and we said, well, we can't really send them a mannequin, right? We can't do that. But why don't we make a virtual mannequin? Why don't we make something that they can see using augmented or virtual reality, so mixed reality? And then we'll show them that mannequin, and then why don't we print some 3D printed tools? And the 3D printed tools are really cheap. It costs us less than $1 to print a set of 3D printed tools. And so if we send them off to the students and the students don't give them back to us, it doesn't really matter. So we can send them the tools, we can send them a headset to wear the phone in front of their head so that they can practice that skill. So the problem was they wanted to practice. Solution was, can we send them a mannequin? How can the technology help? We can make it affordable for you to send each and every one of those students a mannequin. And as you can see, our first integration of that was pretty ghetto. You can see Emma wearing it on the left-hand side. We didn't have a headset. Those stereoscopic headsets weren't really available. So instead we got a cap, and we attached some 3D printed mounts to it, and we anchored their phone in front of about 3 inches from their eyes, there in the front of their face. I love these images because if it's a CQU image, it's got the CQU logo, and if it's a Bond person, they're always wearing a Bond hat for some reason. I don't know what happens there. And but that's what we had initially. And we sent it off to the students, and we tested it. And we got some really good feedback, some really positive feedback from the students. So you can see here is an example of how that actually works, and what it actually looked like in the first iteration there in the top left-hand side. And we got some good feedback from the students. They enjoyed it. They felt that it was really, really valuable to do it, but we didn't have a statistically significant difference for their learning outcomes. Because as James said earlier, we decided pretty early on that it wasn't really useful to just check usability. Pedagogy calls them happy sheets. We didn't want happy sheets. We didn't want students saying, yeah, this is awesome. We wanted to be able to say, yeah, this helped their learning. And so after the first iteration, they all loved it. We got the awesome part, but we didn't so much get the learning outcome part. And so we looped back around. We reflected, and we revised, and we said, well, why did these students have some trouble? And we made some changes. And one of the changes that we made, there were a few different changes that we made, but one of the changes that we made is that we changed the actual visualization. So if you look at this image, before I flip to the next one, you can see that each of the tools has a big square marker attached to it. And that big square marker, you can see it all the time because we were doing augmented reality. So you can see Jeremy's arms there. You can see the watch that he's wearing. And because of that, you could see the cubes. And what we found is that students were trying to place the cube in the markers, in the guides, instead of putting the tools in the guides. They got distracted by the cubes. And so what we decided to do is we decided to change the cube to something a bit flatter. James worked out that he didn't need a 3D marker. He could actually use a 2D marker, and it worked about the same. And we also turned off the augmented reality, and we made it virtual. So what actually happens now is you see your arms to begin with. You position the tools, and then once it knows that you've got the tools in roughly the right spot, it turns off the camera. It turns it into virtual reality. And so that gave the students more opportunity to put the tool in the right place rather than trying to place the markers in the right place. And then the other thing we did is we got rid of the hat. we found a stereoscopic headset. It helped that the world moved on a bit and they got cheaper. And so we were able to do a stereoscopic version of the app with a proper headset. We still bought them for under 20 bucks each. And so the whole kit cost less than 25 bucks each to send to the students. We asked them to bring them back to the res school at the end of term, but if they don't, it doesn't really matter. But we've actually not done too bad in getting the stuff back. So, sorry, I skipped a slide. So there's some of the reflections. I got ahead of myself. There's some of the reflections from the students. You can see some of the comments relating to the stuff that I just said. Things like struggling with the setup of the equipment. I love the one about my hand seemed to pass through the mannequin, which gave us the clue that AR wasn't working so well. And they got frustrated with the app having the red box and restarting all of the time when they got into the application. And we actually made a change there to make it a little bit easier for them to get further along. Originally, they had to hold the forceps in the field of view all of the time. We changed it so that they only needed to worry about the forceps when they got to the forceps step, which helped a little bit. So that was the reflections, and then this is version 2, which I was just telling you about. You can see on the left-hand side there that James is wearing the headset now instead of the funky hat, and you can see that the images that we've got there are stereoscopic, I think. Yeah?
Oh,
yeah, they are stereoscopic. Oh, you clipped it a little bit. Okay, they are. So they've now got a stereoscopic view. So the students find that much better. And the result is, oh, there's not enough slide. The result was that we sent it away for a second trial. We collected some data, and we did finally have a statistically significant difference between the students that got the app versus the students that didn't. In other words, using the tools had improved their learning as opposed to just looking at the images and looking at the videos. They had learned more effectively prior to coming to the residential school. And so we were really happy with that. And I think it kind of reinforced for us this idea of the pedagogy coming before the technology. And since then, all of those other projects that James talked about, the networking project and some of the stuff that we're doing now, all tries to sort of hew to that idea of pedagogy before technology and using that design-based research framework. So I think that's not, I didn't do too bad, I don't think. We're about half an hour in. So we'll stay in the same spot, or do you want to swap back? Let's swap back so that otherwise they'll think I'm James and you're Michael. And we're happy to answer any questions and have a bit of a chat about mixed reality and how that works.